Well, welcome to the second session of today's webinar on the Green Belt and Road. This afternoon session will consist of first a presentation by my colleague, Mr. Asghari, who has been active in more ways than one can count to promote the work of the Belt and Road on social media and interactions, interviews. He has also been the primary author of a document which I recommend that everybody can access on our website, which is China. It's a basic response to the document or the white paper that is referenced in the invitation on China's epic journey from poverty to prosperity. What is it, and what is in it for the world? And that document, I think, is an excellent document to make known and to be read, to understand how unique, as it was referred to by others in the earlier session, the developments in China have been in the last 50 odd years since they have opened up. And at the same time, Mr. Asghari will take up now a topic on the issue of the balance between economic development, poverty eradication, and a clean environment, where he will address some of the questions that were coming up in the first session regarding Africa. And then I will speak on some of the questions that were raised regarding the issue of harmony in nature, but from a slightly different point of view. And I hope that as many will be able to join us for both of those. But first, Mr. Asghari, I would give you the floor, and you're most welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. I think my presentation will have certain bits and pieces from what was presented by the excellent speakers in the morning session, but I will have to contrast it with some other things that are usually kept aside. And as you said, it's the question of balance between economic development, poverty eradication, and a cleaner environment. Now, China's incredible economic development is often portrayed as an obstacle to reaching climate goals. We heard some of the speakers discuss that. And consequently, the Belt and Road Initiative is cast in the same light, that the Belt and Road Initiative is going to be exactly what also a problem for the climate and the environment. But we need to look at some facts first, because it seems that for some people still arguing that pulling 800 million people out of poverty and maybe other hundreds of millions outside of China out of poverty could be a real environmental and climate problem. Now, I will share with you some slides. I think okay, this is our vision of the global connectivity. Now, this is Professor Geraci presented a much better picture, actually. It does not go back to the 18th century, but this is a metaphorical picture. It gives a sense of what the problem is, because China is accused of being the biggest emitter. But one of the things that are not mentioned is that the historical emissions record shows that China is actually, relative to the United States and Europe, is a minor factor in this. It's only 12%, while the United States is 25%. Then I want you to pay attention to the area in blue, which is Africa, which I will come back to, which is a minimum of only 3% of the global. The other factor, which is not told in the narratives about China's emissions, is if you compare it to per capita, because China is 1.4 billion people, and it's rapidly becoming the biggest industrial economy. but per capita, it has much, much less than the United States, Australia, Canada, Netherlands, Japan, Germany, and so on. So this is another factor which is being ignored. Another important factor which is being ignored is that actually China is producing almost 30% of all goods manufactured in the world. So China is being accused of using coal and other fossil fuels to produce goods which we have on our shelves here in Europe and in the United States, mostly in the United States. So that is not being taken into consideration when looking at China is doing an enormous job to fill the shelves of every country in the world. What is also not being taken into consideration, by the way, I have just to go back to this one, I want you to check the 4 lowest ones in terms of per capita emissions, which are in Africa. Uganda, Rwanda, Chad is below 0.1. I will come back to that. Now, what is being also ignored is that China is, I think some of the speakers mentioned this, China is the biggest clean energy producer in the world. It has also developed hydropower. It has like the Three Gorges Dam, the Baihetan Dam, the Shilodo Dam, all these. China has built 4 of the largest dams in the world, the 4 first largest dams in the world, which is clean energy, of course. We have also China, as was discussed also by Stephen and others, and Mr. Henry Tillman, where he discusses the development of the small modular reactors, but China is also investing heavily in the large-scale fission reactors. It has 50 reactors in operation. It has 18 reactors under construction. And recently, China announced that it's having 150 reactors. These are large reactors with above 1,000 megawatts per reactor, planned for the next 20 to 30 years. So that's also a factor which is being ignored in China's massive transformation of its economy. Also, China invests heavily in the fusion power development, which is the real solar power, we can say, to harness the power which is inside the sun and bring it back to Earth by creating a sun on Earth. This is different than solar energy. This is millions and millions of times more powerful source of energy and electricity than solar power. This is being done, as Stephen said, domestically in China, but also China is contributing to the international thermonuclear reactor, the experimental thermonuclear reactor, the ITER, in France. All other countries, especially the United States, have reduced and almost eliminated their investments in fusion power, which is the power of the future. It is the safest and cleanest energy source. And as Stephen said, this could be enough to supply humanity with energy, cheap, clean energy for thousands of years to come. Now, China is also transforming its transport systems over to rail. China has built the world's largest and longest both high-speed rail, but also conventional rail, but mostly electrified. So, and it's transporting hundreds and probably billions of passengers every year and reducing the dependency on air traffic. Another amazing thing which has happened in the last 30 years in China's history, I mean, we mentioned this in the review of the paper, which Stephen mentioned. I and other colleagues wrote a review of the white paper produced by China, called From Poverty to Prosperity, the epic journey from poverty to prosperity. But what China has done, and this is a report, a 20-year study by the US National Space Agency, it says that it's China, in the past 20 years have made the planet greener, China and India together, but China has like several percentages above India in that sense. So since 1978, China increased its forest area from 12% to 23% of the whole land area, and the vegetation coverage of its grasslands to 56% of the land area of China, which is not little. That's 9 million square kilometers. China has transformed many parts of its deserts into oases and covered the Laos plateau, for example, with greenery. The country has the highest growth in forest resources and the largest area of man-made forests in the world. It had also brought over 50% of its wetlands area under protection. China has also launched the National Forest Cities, which is turning forests inside cities into a reality. Total of 468 cities have been part of the greening movement and raising the green space to 38.2% of the urban built area. So you have in every one of these cities, you have parks and forests all over these cities. China has launched also the project called the Shelter Belts in northern and northwestern regions, which are very dry desert areas. The project spanned 13 provinces and autonomous regions, covering a total area of close to 4 million square kilometers, or 42% of China's landmass. This is, if we compare it, this is 4.5 times the combined area of France and Germany. It is scheduled to continue for 73 years through 2050 and plans to develop 35 million hectares of forests. So this is a massive achievement, and this is also a reduction of the coal dioxide. Now, many people, due to the massive hysteria, I can call it, around the climate change, people think that carbon dioxide is a poisonous gas and dangerous, and we should stop emitting it. That's not true. It's the favorite food of all plants, and actually one of the building blocks of all life on this planet. So there are positive ways of solving problems, and there are negative ways of solving problems by saying we should shut down everything and go back to the Middle Ages. So therefore, humanity progresses through creativity and innovation rather than regress in the current stage of panic, which is also required. So the second part of my my presentation is on the question of development vis-a-vis this question of climate mitigation. First of all the nations of the world, not only China, have a responsibility to lift all people out of poverty. This is the top priority of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals 2030. If we look at the original list of USDGs that the developing nations fought for at the United Nations, this was not an easy thing to achieve, to put it on the agenda of the international community, that we find the correct priorities of the international community as we see here. Now, the priority number 1 is to eliminate poverty from the world. The priority number 2 is to eliminate hunger from the world, bring good health, education, gender equality, clean water, electricity, industrialization and urban development, infrastructure development, and so on and so forth. Now, if we look at the that in the current ongoing stampede, which we see, like for example in the climate summit, the COP26 in Glasgow, they want to rush an agreement at whatever cost. In that process, many nations' economic development goals are pushed aside, and the excuse is that we don't really have time. And therefore, somehow the priorities are being scrambled to look like this. I call it sustainable development acrobatics, because in the developed countries, they don't suffer the same problems like poverty, hunger, the lack of electricity, lack of clean water, lack of education, healthcare, modern infrastructure, and so on. Not yet. We are seeing that we are coming also into these kinds of troubles in the United States with both poverty, lack of infrastructure, lack of electricity. But these things are, these problems, if you don't develop the whole world and you are part of it, these problems will come back to haunt you. And therefore, we cannot have a divided world and at the same time hope to live in peace and prosperity. We saw this very clearly in the COVID-19 pandemic, where the developed nations were only worried about themselves with the vaccines, but not vaccinating everybody, like the general director of the World Health Organization said, if we don't vaccinate everybody on the planet, if not everybody is safe, nobody is safe. And therefore we have to change the priorities. And you see here in the Western media, think tanks and universities, the priorities are completely upside down, where the question of poverty, hunger, education, infrastructure, clean water take a backseat compared to questions related to environment. And this is a problem we cannot afford to see. Now, we go back to the first issue I discussed, and I asked you to look at the question of Africa's so-called emissions, which are only 3% of the global historical emissions. Now, there's an underlying problem here is that if you take out South Africa, Algeria, Nigeria, and probably Egypt, you will end up with having less than 0.1 of the emissions in the sub-Saharan countries. Now, according to the African Development Bank, according to the African Development Bank, over 640 million Africans out of one total population of 1.3 billion have no access to energy, corresponding to an electricity access rate for African countries at just over 40%. That's the lowest in the world. The per capita consumption of energy in sub-Saharan Africa, excluding South Africa, of course, is 180 kilowatt hours, compared to 13,000 kilowatt hours per capita in the United States and 6,500 kilowatt hours in Europe. So 180 compared to 13,000. That's what the situation is in Africa. And at the same time, of the world's 783 million people total in the world who are without access to clean water, 40% of them live in sub-Saharan Africa. And more than 320 million people lack access to safe drinking water. And waterborne diseases is the biggest killer of African children, next to malaria. That's children below the age of 5. And then we have all these, the lack of water is also a reflection of lack of energy and power. And we have these piecemeal aid-based initiatives that cost billions and billions of dollars over decades, but they don't really solve the problem we have with creating a prosperous society in Africa, a self-sustaining society. So then we come to the third part, of course, and how does China's massive program translates and into the development process in other Belt and Road nations, especially in Africa and Asia? What do we learn from China's development for Africa's development? And what is the contribution of China in Africa's development? Now, to go from this aid-based process, which has actually kept Africa in poverty for many years, we have to move away from what we have as the colonial system into the modern system and a visionary system for the African nations. And this is not something which comes from outside. This is actually a vision of the African Union itself. Now, there are reasons why China is very popular in Africa rather than the United Nations and other forums or the EU, is because China both can show how a poor nation, as the previous speakers said, can actually develop into a modern industrial nation, and also can share the technology, share the knowledge and other things with the African nations. Now, the attractiveness of China to Africans is because China managed to alleviate poverty and creating sustainable growth, industrial development, and it does not have political strings attached like what loans and aid coming from the United States and Europe generally. But one important difference is that what the Chinese leadership really believe is what President Xi Jinping said in the Forum on Africa, on the China-Africa Cooperation Summit in Johannesburg already in 2015. And he said that industrialization, and you never hear this word industrialization coming from European leaders who visit Africa. He said industrialization is an inevitable path to a country's economic success. With a short span of several decades, China has accomplished what took developed countries hundreds of years to accomplish, and put in place a complete industrial system with an enormous production capacity, end of quote. He also said it's entirely possible for Africa, as the world's most promising region in terms of development potential, to bring into play its advantages and achieve great success. The achievement of inclusive and sustainable development in Africa hinges on industrialization, which holds the key to creating jobs, eradicating poverty, and improving people's living standards. That should be the standard of working with China. And he identified at the same time, President Xi, what he called the 3 bottlenecks of development. It's not climate. It's the shortage of capital, it's shortage of skilled labor, and lack of infrastructure. And to mitigate these, China has offered in the first 5-year plan, $60 billion in foreign direct infrastructure investments, and promised to also invest $60 billion since last time, the last summit in 2019-22, dedicated to infrastructure development, but that also includes healthcare and education. Concerning the other bottleneck, which is the shortage of skilled labor, China has emerged as the most attractive country after France in attracting students studying in China. It surpassed the United Kingdom and the United States in 2013. It's only surpassed by France for other reasons. China is also, within its infrastructure projects, is increasing the skills. It gives training courses to the local labor to develop the skills to be able to run the infrastructure projects China is building together with these countries. And here we see the ladies who are now running the Mombasa-Nairobi railway, standard gauge railway. Instead of having Chinese drivers, it's these Kenyan ladies who were educated in China to be able to run their own railway system. In 2014, the Chinese Prime Minister, that's for the 3rd bottleneck on infrastructure, the Chinese Prime Minister Li Keqiang, in a visit to Africa, he pledged to help Africa connect all the African capitals with modern, if not high-speed railway, with standard gauge railway, and then in the future with high-speed railway. This plan here is not a Chinese plan. It's part of the African Union's Lagos plan, which is to connect all the African capitals with highways. Now, this is not really advisable because it's not practical, it's not cost effective, and it's not energy effective. Railways are much better in terms of connectivity, both speed, energy consumption, and impact on environment. Now, within these, since 2014, China managed to build a number of electrified railways, which is the Djibouti-Addis Ababa railway. We had the Mombasa-Nairobi, and now there are ongoing plans to connect the landlocked countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, and Eastern Congo, Zambia, and so on, to the East Africa network. We also saw the Chinese cooperation with Angola, Zambia, and Tanzania to both revive but also modernize the Tesara railway. We also need to develop Africa's river and lake as transport systems, exactly as Europe managed to do with the Black Sea, Danube, Rhine-Main river transport system. It's completely possible and feasible to connect all African rivers, almost all African rivers and lakes together from South Africa to Egypt and also to West Africa. We also have to, in terms of the climate change, people talk a lot about climate change, but very little is being done by the advanced world to save the Lake Chad, which has shrunk to 10% of its original size over the years, and tens of millions of people who are dependent on the water, both for grazing, agriculture, and fishing, have to migrate and create new social and other problems. But a plan which has been promoted for decades, but has been opposed by the European Union and the United States, the World Bank, and other organizations, including environmental organizations, is to replenish Lake Chad with water, a small fraction of water from the tributaries of the Congo River. As we see here, this is the watershed area of the Congo River from the upper Congo lands. And this blue line is a canal, which is 2,000 kilometers long, to collect water and bring it to the Chari River in the Central Republic of Central Africa and down to Chad and Lake Chad to replenish the water of the lake, but also create an agro-industrial zone to stabilize both the climate, but also the economy of that region. And that's also combined with building railways and highways to connect East Africa to the Central African countries, the Great Lakes, and to West Africa, Nigeria. This plan in a conference in Nigeria 2 years ago, well, actually a Chinese and an Italian company, they agreed to do a feasibility study of the project, although there is resistance from the Congo to do that. But there are enough studies to show that this is feasible and important. We have also the potential of Africa's potential for clean electricity from hydropower is more than 100,000 megawatts and could be increased more, but only in the Congo River around the project, the legendary project, which is called the Grand Iga Dam, which is a series of dams, have not been built yet. We can generate 40,000 megawatts of electricity. That's double the amount produced in China's Three Gorges Dam, which is the world's largest. This one will be double the size of the Three Gorges Dam. Even here, a Chinese Sino Hydro and a Spanish company went together to present a bid to do the feasibility study and engineering works. The problem is that both the World Bank, the EU, and environmental groups are opposed to this in the West, of course, which is very vital for Congo, for the neighbors of Congo to provide clean, sustainable energy. So there's a great deal of hypocrisy in dealing with Africa. We also have the prospects of developing nuclear power in Africa because it's the right of every nation to acquire this important technology. There are new kinds of technologies like this one, the pebble bed, inherently safe nuclear power technology, which was developed in Germany but was abandoned there. And we have an attempt to rebuild it in South Africa. We have also very ambitious plans by many countries, but especially Egypt in cooperation with Russia, to build nuclear power plants here in Aldaba on the Mediterranean, a large nuclear power plant. But also it's building the world's first high school for young kids for advanced nuclear technology, where those kids are getting education on to how to maintain the different aspects of a nuclear power plant as technicians, not as engineers, but as technicians. But those kids can later become engineers for nuclear technology. So this is a very unique school in Egypt, and only the best of the school kids can get into that school. So those kids will be running some power plant like this. Of course, the senior engineers are being educated now in Russia, and Russia and Egypt are going to start working on this power plant this year. Now, Russia and China also have many nuclear technology cooperation agreements with African countries. Unfortunately, the United States and Europe are not interested in this kind of cooperation with Africa. Now, this is the whole issue. If we want Africa, because Africa has all the right to use all the mixture of technology for producing power, because without electricity and power, you cannot have sustainable development. And this means that you have to actually raise Africa to the level of the moderately, as the Chinese call it, moderately prosperous societies, but you have to provide the infrastructure, the education, and the healthcare to sustain such a development. So in that sense, in that sense, we have China's role is very crucial now, but as our institute have been insisting, Europe and the United States and Japan and India, they should actively participate in this project to make Africa's dreams and aspirations become true, and should not be crushed under the hysterical stampede we are seeing now to get climate agreement at any cost. Now, there's need, of course, for rationality and compassion with other people when we deal with such matters as the climate and economic development. Now, the negligence by the developed world of the question of development in Africa and other developing regions has prompted strong protests from African leaders before and during the climate summit, the COP26, which is still ongoing now. I think I stopped. I just want to read for you some of the quotes from these African leaders. For example, the Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni, speaking on behalf of African nations, he wrote in Wall Street Journal an op-ed on October 24th before the summit, which is titled "Solar and Wind Force Poverty on Africa." He said, Africa can't sacrifice its future prosperity for Western climate goals. The continent should balance its energy mix, not rush straight forward to renewables, even though that will likely frustrate some of those gathering at next week's Global Climate Conference in Glasgow. So President Museveni saying that Africa should be allowed, even concerning fossil fuels, to be able to, like natural gas, even coal power, because Africa's share of global emission is so small, it does not really affect, but the power you can generate is very crucial for Africa. The Nigerian president, Muhammadu Buhari, also to publicly criticize the COP26 summit in an op-ed he published in Newsweek on November 1st, the first day of the summit. He said the climate crisis will not be fixed by causing an energy crisis in Africa. Buhari's message, of course, was simple. Energy is necessary for life, and if you deny it, you will simply turn a climate crisis into an energy crisis. He said, quote, energy solutions proposed by those most eager to address the climate crisis are fueling for this instability of which they are warning, end of quote. And he also emphasized that without a reliable source of power, Africa cannot build the factories that will transform Africa from a low-job, extractive-led economy to a high-employment, middle-income continent. He said, in addition, that battery light is not much better than candlelight. And he also said that Africa of tomorrow deserves more, as I showed actually here. I think there are many other leaders protested, including the Bolivian president, which he talked about carbon colonialism, which the developed nations now, after that they causing this crisis. Now they want to colonize the developing nations with these climate procedures, also by denying financial investment into energy production, whether it's fossil fuels, nuclear, or hydro. The United States and Europe do not invest even in clean energy in Africa. So they are trying to convince African nations that they, for the sake of the planet, for the sake of humanity, they should not develop, because we all will die. And it's therefore we have to have a rational discussion on how to go forward and with what means. I believe that China's development model and the Belt and Road can be such a vehicle, but it needs to be joined by all nations in order to achieve the common aims of mankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Askari. A lot to think about from the points you raise. I would say that a couple of things that I would welcome in the coming webinars. You mentioned the role of Russia in developing nuclear power in Egypt. And of course, I mentioned that there were such projects for South Africa from China's side. I would welcome that we would have diplomatic or other representatives from Russia who would participate in future discussions for the basis of cooperation and global development. You also identified the role of India in terms of greening together with China and how far they have proceeded. And I would also welcome India, who has not yet officially joined the Belt and Road. Of course, there is pressure on them from certain Western powers to not do that, but I think it would be a great contribution for them to be included in the Belt and Road and participate in that. Before I go to my presentation, I will also just mention that although we identified quite clearly that there are overwhelming negativity in the mass media in the Western world, including from where we are situated in Sweden and Norway, and even in some of the other Scandinavian countries against China, and certainly against, to the degree it's mentioned, the Belt and Road. However, it's interesting to just mention briefly that the former ambassador from Ethiopia spoke at this webinar, actually seminar in 2019. Deriba Kuma was one of the guest speakers and identified how far Ethiopia had gone in developing the Belt and Road and the Grand Renaissance Dam in terms of the rail between Djibouti and Addis Ababa, which Hussein mentioned. Now Ethiopia is under massive destabilization. And the question of course could be asked, does that seem to have any relation to the fact that they were perhaps one of the, or not perhaps one of the leading African nations that openly identified itself in a positive role with the Belt and Road? One could also perhaps even mention the fact that Belarus, which we identified earlier as being one of the key nodal points in promoting and bringing transport into Europe from Minsk and into Europe, is also right now under attack, which I think is rather obvious from all the media. Now, whether or not there's a direct relationship, I am not going to say, but it is worthy to note that beyond the negative propaganda, there seems to be evidence that those certain elements that are positive to the Belt and Road do not seem to be embraced in a positive way by the European Union or some of these others. So I hope that we will see some changes in that direction if we work in the right way. So I will now present what might be a bit challenging for some, but I believe it's important concepts to raise in light of some of the discussion that also came up about what the Green Belt and Road Initiative means in terms of a harmony from the point of view of development, as well as respecting and understanding the role of nature and man's relationship to it. So is it possible you could share that now, Hussein? Do you have that? Yeah, so this is the title of the presentation I'm going to make is a short study in a proposed what I call philosophical Belt and Road Initiative, and the significance of a philosopher, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, for European and Chinese friendship in today's world. So we can go to the next one. We have heard, behind me you see the global map for global development, in which the emphasis upon necessary cooperation and win-win cooperation has been has been taken up quite clearly. I'm not going to go into that, but I am going to mention that it has been clearly identified that what is meant by the Green Belt and Road Initiative, and even the Belt and Road Initiative as such, is seen entirely differently in the East and the West, and even in the North and the South. And why is that the case? We have seen the statements by Xi Jinping in his call for the Belt and Road as a community for a shared future for mankind, which is obviously a perspective for not for only China's interest, but clearly for global interests. And economic development and cooperation is a necessary and practical pathway for the future. It enhances partnership. It presents trade and mutual benefits. And as it was expressed by the president of China, it's clearly a win-win basis of cooperation. However, friendship and a concept of the common good are lying in a certain sense on a deeper level. It is not only how, or as one of the previous speakers, Professor Gerace, said, that it is more than just making money, which of course is a motivating factor, and cooperation and development clearly is that. But there are other deeper questions which, in my view, need to be addressed in order to consolidate the successful propagation of the Belt and Road. Now, this philosopher, who is perhaps not so well known, unfortunately, but in what I will address, I hope will become globally much more well known in the relevance of his work for the modern situation that we're facing. Leibniz, in his work, he addresses these principles that in ways that are unique in the history of mankind. They are, as I said, as relevant and important for today's world as they were in Leibniz's own time, which I will reference a bit later. What is the nature of the human mind? and how does it interact with the physical universe? The character of Leibniz, that the human mind is in principle good, working to fulfill a mission in the divine ordering of the universe. That is the creative capacity of the human mind to discover new technologies. That is the basis for economy. Without the development of new technologies, we could still be rolling around in the Stone Age. But the ability of man's thought processes distinguish us from any other creature. On the other side, that is Leibniz's conception. On the other side, there was and unfortunately still is operating a kind of dominant Hobbesian view. And that is that men and women are principally selfish, egotistical. They strive only for self-fulfillment at the expense of others. Therefore, we, in Thomas Hobbes' view, the British philosopher who propagated these ideas, in his time, we needed kings or tyrants to control and suppress these bestial impulses that are native to the human beings. Now, Leibniz is in principle, direct counter to that. And that Hobbesian view is, whether it's expressed in such form, is actually dominant in terms of the fear and the aggression that is directed by powerful forces in the West against China. The Leibnizian substance of reality actually governs the universal principles which are the basis for uniting cultures. Now, that has been addressed also by the president of China, Xi Jinping, as a dialogue of cultures, which is fundamental in addition to the economic collaboration that we have already addressed. So are these questions off today's topic? Well, maybe in a certain sense, but in a more profound sense, I do not think at all that they are off topic, because they are challenging and difficult. I will address some of them. Generally, many people prefer to avoid discussing this, but nonetheless, they are the foundation upon which true communication and dialogue is built. Ultimately, I am convinced that without them, humanity will not successfully achieve the goals outlined as it was expressed for a community for a shared and better future for mankind. So the principles of the philosophical mind are, in the Leibnizian sense, the essential elements for building a vision of optimism and of optimism for a better future. So take the second slide. Now, here is what I think is one of the most relevant questions as to Western, unfortunately, negative responses to China. Xi Jinping is, and I will, in the next slide, show this, that he has directly referenced the role of Confucius as a key part of the development and the education of China in the modern sense of the word. This is a society, as we probably many know, that goes back Chinese history, well, Confucius about 2,500 years, but China's history is much older. It's even about 5,000 years in terms of history. But what I have seen and read in the works of Xi Jinping is much more than just a leader of whatever political faction you want to identify, be it communist or capitalist or whatever particular label you put on it. He is a philosophical thinker, and we have unfortunately, quite few, if any, beyond him at the present moment in human history. So we go to the next slide. So this is some reflections on why partly I reference Xi Jinping not only as president of China, but as a philosophical thinker, which is virtually not seen or understood whatsoever in Western society, to my knowledge generally. President Xi Jinping works to revive a Confucianism in China. This in 2014, at the Confucius anniversary, he was encouraging the study of the great Chinese philosopher and emphasized the importance of Confucian tradition for China's development. And he also approved the books, the interpretation of the Analects and the collected sayings of dialogues of Confucius. And in the following second forum in April 2019, on the conference following the Belt and Road, second Belt and Road Forum, on the conference on the dialogues of Asian civilizations, it's a bit hard to read the quote there. Maybe you can, I don't know if you can move it slightly, but to meet our challenges and create a better future for all, we look to culture and civilization to play their role, which is important, which is as important as the role played by economy, science, and technology. And by putting our heads together, we will create a better future for humanity, for tomorrow. So next slide. So this Leibniz represents, and this I will only touch on, I am not able to go into details, but I welcome anyone to further contact with me who wishes to dive into this in a more profound way. That reality is the nature of the human mind, as I specified by a Leibnizian idea of the creative good and its relationship to the actual ordering of the physical universe. And that is fundamentally different, the reality versus an idea of what we might call the world of appearances, or how things simply appear through what we see through our senses. The five senses are useful, but they do not distinguish humanity or human beings from animals. Animals also have five senses, which they use, but the human capacity to use reason, which is the foundation of technological development, as it has been emphasized by President Xi Jinping over and over again, is the basis upon which the human mind affects and changes the physical universe for the better. Next slide. So these are just some points. Human beings are, is that possible to move it down slightly? I don't see the top of the, human beings are an asset for development, not an obstacle. The creative human mind is the source for economic development, as I've said, through science and technological progress and discovery. The arguments for a clean and green environment should not, as my colleague was going through, and need not include arguments against human population growth and economic development simultaneously. They work together. For China, human development and proper respect for nature are in balance and in harmony. And that is very much a Confucian concept of harmony between the society and its relationship to nature. So now here you have a little bit of history, which I think is relevant to why I'm referencing Leibniz in some detail, although this is preliminary. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz lived from 1646 until 1716. When he was only 2 years old, the 30 Years' War ended and Europe entered what was called what began the age, or the Treaty of Westphalia, which was the end of the perpetual wars, which were destroying the population and the conditions in Europe. However, the picture on the other side is a picture of a Jesuit, Italian Jesuit, Matteo Ricci, who lived earlier, 1552 to 1610. However, he, in this picture, it is a picture of him exchanging with the Emperor of China the education and the knowledge which is built on Euclidean ideas of mathematics and the foundation for how European knowledge and Chinese knowledge, when China was at an extremely high level of society and development and population-wise even greater than Europe during this time, or Leibniz's time in the end of the 1600s. Next slide. So this is a quote from Leibniz in what he wrote in the new, in a journal that was published by him, or actually published in 1697, Novissima Sinica. And on the left, you see a map of how, in a certain sense, the world looked at that time. And he's saying, I consider it a singular plan of the fates that human cultivation and refinement should today be concentrated, as it were, in the two extremes of our continent, in Europe and in China, which adores the Orient as Europe does the opposite edge of the earth. Perhaps supreme providence has ordained such an arrangement, so that as the most cultivated and distant people stretch out their arms to each other, those in between may gradually be brought to a better way of life. I do not think it an accident that the Russians, whose vast realm connects Europe and with China, and who hold sway over the barbarous lands of the north by the shore of the frozen ocean, should be led to the emulation of our ways through the strenuous efforts of their present ruler. At that time, he helped to establish the Science Academy in St. Petersburg under Tsar Peter the Great. And Leibniz was actually, although he was born in Germany, he was actually a member of the honorary member of the Russian government, in which he had met the Tsar of Russia. Okay, next slide. This is a discourse that Leibniz wrote at the very end of his life. Leibniz was involved in virtually every aspect of global history and thought processes in his time. But in this particular discourse, which he wrote virtually just before he died in the form of correspondence with many of his philosophical and political contacts, Leibniz claimed that the Chinese had independently discovered the concepts which were identical to those in the Christian culture and religious matrix. Li, the principle, truth of heaven, and Shangdi, the creator. They sacrifice, this is Leibniz's ideas now, they sacrifice to this visible heaven, or rather its king, and what is a little bit hard to read there, I should reference or revere profound silence, that Li, which they do not name because of the potential ignorant or vulgarity of the people who would not understand It's the nature. What we call the light of reason in man, they call commandment and rule of heaven. What we call the inner satisfaction of obeying justice and avoiding fear of acting contrary to it, all this is called by the Chinese and by, I don't see that, I'm sorry, well inspiration sent by Chang Ti. To offend heaven is to act against reason, the power of the human mind. For me, I find all this quite excellent and quite in accord with natural theology. Now, I won't go into this, but the reference to Matteo Ricci developed, and during Leibniz's time, there was what they called the rights controversy, which was fundamentally the idea that during the time of Leibniz, the missionaries were debating whether China had to become Christian directly or whether or not the actual traditions that China had developed within its own culture, i.e. Confucius, was something that should be accepted in light of their own sovereign and historical viewpoints. Leibniz was directly sympathetic to the fact that you cannot force another nation, as it was unfortunately done by the church at around the time of Leibniz's last years, to insist that the Chinese who were going to be converted must abandon all of their connections to their own Confucius history and philosophy. And that ultimately, unfortunately, led, one can say, into a more dark period later, which led to the colonization and, as people know, the Opium Wars and the British colonization and destruction of China. So Leibniz was a very clear proponent of cooperation on the highest level. Next slide. Now, this is a speech from Xi Jinping in Germany from 2014, which I think is very relevant to confirming what I'm saying. That this man is not simply the president and the leader of Germany, I'm sorry, of China, that he is a philosophical thinker, and this speech that he made quite shortly after the launching of the Belt and Road in Germany, I think highlights again the deeper level of his thought. What has been made possible for China and Germany to make such good progress in exchanges and cooperation? A key factor, in my view, is that thanks to mutual efforts made over the years, our two sides have come to appreciate that countries different in history, culture, national condition, and social system need to deepen mutual understanding, treat each other with sincerity, be ready to listen to each other's views, and put oneself in the other's position in addressing related issues. Mutual understanding is the foundation of state-to-state relations. Deeper mutual understanding will cement and broaden the foundation of our exchanges and cooperation. Now, I underline that. Mutual understanding is the foundation of state-to-state relations. Deeper mutual understanding will cement and broaden the foundation of our exchanges and cooperation, i.e. on the economic side of things. And then you get even an insight to his thinking at that time. Thanks to over 30 years of rapid growth achieved through reform and opening up, China now ranks the second place in the world. As China continues to grow, some people start to worry. Some view China through colored glasses and believe that China will inevitably become a threat as it develops further. They even portray China as some type of terrifying monster or Mephisto who would someday suck the soul of the world. Absurdity as such couldn't be more ridiculous, yet some people regrettably are never tired of preaching it. This shows that prejudice is indeed hard to overcome. And then he says, a review of human history tells us that what keeps people apart are not mountains, rivers, or oceans, but a lack of understanding. As Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz once observed, only the sharing of our talents will light the lamp of wisdom. So the next one. Now, Leibniz's optimism was based on very profound concepts, which I will not be able to develop now, but I hope will become a platform for not only Xi Jinping's reference to the importance of Leibniz, because Leibniz was a philosophical and theological thinker who united the ideas of human mind with how the universe works, how nature works. And that optimism which he had in terms of the nature of the human mind is the pathway that can cure East-West turmoil and the danger of conflict. Now, he used certain concepts which I will just say, but I will not be able to develop in this period, but it's important to at least reference. One is the law of sufficient reason. Things don't happen without a reason. They're not just arbitrary chance events. He talks about what he calls the best of all possible worlds. And he talks about something called a pre-established harmony, a harmony between the nature of the human mind and how the physical universe works together with it. And then he identifies very clearly a notion of a force, a creator, who is all powerful, all wise, and all loving. So power does not exclude knowledge, nor does it exclude the compassion and the loving nature, which is in the Greek form referred to as agape. And the image of man in humanity in the image of his creator. That is the creative force in the universe itself, which is reflected in the human thought process. So these are the fundamental conceptions, if used and understood in a general social and educational context today, would and will cut through the superficiality as well as the misleading false ideas, which are advocates of misunderstanding, clash of civilization, fabrication of unnecessary untruths, and clash of cultures or nation states, which are leading humanity in the direction of unfortunately in the wrong direction, but that humanity otherwise could be led in the direction of the desired goal for cooperation, but surely more important, as I say in the beginning, friendship and the love for your fellow man. And that would mean that when China puts out a hand in the form of the Belt and Road, instead of disrespecting and advocating mistrust, in friendship, you take the hand and you shake it. And that should be, as Leibniz was also saying, the connection between Europe and China through Russia, that we put out the hand and we shake it and we work together through these economic foundations for the future. So thank you. Questions? that can be directed towards Mr. Askari or myself. Mr. Tillman, I think.
Yes, thank you. I have, sorry.
You should
Okay.
start your video.
Sorry, oh, sorry, I don't know what happened here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry, first of all, both great presentations, very different, but very linked, but they're terrific. So first to Mr. Askari. You know, we have both done a lot of work in healthcare and the Health Silk Road. And I just want to raise 2 or 3 points on Africa first before I move on to Stephen. And in Africa, what has been working so far with the BRI vaccine linkages are Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt. And those seem to have some traction locally in conjunction with China to date. All 3 of those are functional. Egypt now is planning on producing 1 billion doses over the next 2 years, which is a huge change. But I completely agree with your point on Ethiopia. I had maintained relationships with that country for the last several years. They have been a huge success story. And of course, when it came to kits, the basic kits involved, but last year with Ethiopia was a leader in that, one of those SEZs. In a matter of weeks or months, it went from Huawei being thrown out to having the US winning the 5G. And the next day after they won the 5G, they flopped sanctions on Ethiopia. Now, the reason I raised that is because I'm also a businessman, and I also get to work with these countries operationally in technology. And by working with these companies, and I have a meeting in about 2 hours on a leapfrog blockchain technology from one of these major countries. Because of what I just told you about Ethiopia, what you rightfully raised, there's a great deal of fear of working with China. They're not going to say it, but among each other at a lower level right now, because of what happened to Ethiopia, Huawei gets kicked out and we get sanctions the next day. There's a great deal of fear of that. So number one is, I think your point's spot on. I'm just trying to give you a couple of data points to, if you want to just elaborate on that a minute. And then Stephen, I only had one thing for you, which is my understanding is one of the things that makes Xi Jinping unique. He's actually, Xi'an has, and he had a link in Xi'an into Buddhism. So he has a special link into Buddhism as well, in terms of, and that could serve him very well as he starts dealing with things like Tibet and all that sort of stuff. But he was actually schooled by somebody because Xi'an actually had that capability within it. So I wondered how that figures into your Leibniz thing. So maybe 2 quick points, one for Hussein and one for you, Stephen. Thank you.
You want to take it first, Hussein?
Yeah, I think your reference to the China's work with the Algeria, Egypt, and Morocco is concerning the production of vaccines, because those countries are. It's not like China has delivered vaccines to almost all African countries, but these 3 countries, your research shows that they are capable of producing the vaccines domestically in their country, Chinese vaccines. And the reason is, of course, they are unlike many countries in sub-Saharan Africa. They are relatively modernized. There's enough electricity, water, skilled labor, education, and so on. So they are more capable of doing these things than South Africa, of course, is another. But these 3 countries have a relatively modern economy, although they have their own problems, and that's one reason. But that's an important aspect because many nations here are in Europe and in the United States, they want to get the 3rd shot of the vaccine, while almost very, very few of Africans got the 1st shot, except for the countries you mentioned in North Africa. So there's this vaccine monopoly, which you know very well about, that Europe and the United States are making huge, or the companies, the corporations are making huge amounts of money selling the vaccines, while China is providing the vaccines for free for these countries, and even helping them produce their own vaccines, so to break that monopoly. The other question of Ethiopia is that you see I mean, you said it. The United States was asking Ethiopia and other African countries not to cooperate with China, and you will get our assistance. But as soon as they abandon China, they get nothing. They get sanctions, they get civil war, they get all kinds of provocations. And I mean, President Trump actually threatened Ethiopia because of the dispute over the Renaissance Dam with Egypt. But Egypt never threatened Ethiopia. They are neighbors. They are African countries. They said, but President Trump got into the whole situation and said, well, I guess that Egyptians will bomb your dam if you don't listen. So it's that kind of thing. And unfortunately, now we have a situation where the whole country could be split into pieces and civil war. And that's also another issue where people say, we want political reform first before economic reform. I don't think this is how things work. I mean, if you don't have a economic reform, if you don't have a developing economy, a prosperous economy, productive economy, you'll get all kinds of social and political problems. It's the other way around. Around the whole world, I mean, private business, that's their business. If it's an unstable area, they don't go and invest there. But governments should go and invest in unstable countries to stabilize them. This is what China is doing in Pakistan. Pakistan was a terror-infested area when the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor was launched. I mean, many engineers, Chinese engineers, were killed in Pakistan while they were building these highways and dams. But the Chinese never stopped. They said, there's no way back. We have to keep developing Pakistan. That's the way out of terrorism and social problems. And I hope Ethiopia will get out of this in one piece, but it shows also the hypocrisy and the problems we have with especially US policy in the area.
Yeah, I can just add from a friend from Ethiopia who sent me the following little remark on Facebook of a recent input which has been shared by a journalist from Ethiopia. So, she writes, I've been in the business for 10 years, mostly for corporate media. I got to tell you, I will never again take at face value any reports from the New York Times, AP, CNN, even Reuters and the BBC News about any foreign country. I can't do it. They've just been so many bold lies and omissions in the reporting about Ethiopia. You can't even call it journalism at all. It's just pure propaganda, said Hermela Aragawi on BT after observing the biased reporting of the Western media about Ethiopia. So that's coming from somebody directly who sees the distortion of what's going on. I just add that. But in relation to your question, Henry, I would say yes. Look, what I would propose is if we could do it I am not the one at the moment, but the speeches that Xi Jinping makes internationally are so full of the depth of his own thought processes, which are lacking in the West generally, and perhaps that is why they are so terrified of him. But in order to deal with that would be how it would affect these European countries if those speeches were made available directly through the press or in some way through social media in the relevant countries in Europe, where people could actually read his remarks, because unless you seek them out and read them for yourself in CGTN or some other context, the majority of citizens in Scandinavia would never know these things. So one tactic which I think would have a very important impact would be, can we make some of the actual remarks that are being made available to the people of the West, because they certainly do not reflect what the negativity of the media that is being distributed daily. And I think, I think that type of understanding that you make reference to is a clear part of how one can go forward. He says it very clearly in the remarks that I quoted, that knowledge and understanding is the road towards communication.
Mrs.
Okay.
Xu Chen Axelson, can you present yourself first and then ask your question or comment?
Yes, thank you. I am Xu Chen Axelson. I'm editor and reporter from, okay. Oh, is it okay now?
Yeah, I tried to put you in the panel so people can see you.
Okay, then,
Okay.
then
Maybe I shouldn't.
very cold actually in my home. Okay, thank you very much. I'm Xu Chen Axelson, and I'm a journalist. I have a website called Green Post. So today I feel very happy to attend this webinar because we talk about Green Belt and Road. And I indeed promote a lot of Swedish sustainable development and green practice or green idea. I like to say that thank you for very good presentation for today from everybody. But I also like to add some comments about the understanding of Belt and Road. I think why in the developed countries like Nordic or US, people don't really not easy to accept the Belt and Road idea because from beginning, I think the promotion of Belt and Road sounds like only infrastructure. Oh, because China has a overcapacity of construction or infrastructure construction capacity. So they want to export this capacity, and then they have this Belt and Road initiative. And we Europeans, or in the Nordic countries, we already have very good infrastructure, so we don't need that. Huh? So we are already superior in a way. But I think, you know, many times I was asked by the Chinese side, they say, can you please ask the Swedish or the Nordic countries, how can they participate in this Belt and Road initiative? No one answered. I couldn't find anybody to really properly talk about it. And I think that is a kind of misunderstanding that we think the Belt and Road only building the road and only have the infrastructure. But as what we talk about just now, like for example, Henry Tillman, when you talk about the vaccine or Medicare health sector, then I would say that like what our Chinese ambassador to Sweden, Gui Zhongyou, used to talk about. Belt and Road actually it's very comprehensive. So not just infrastructure, it includes health, include green development, include even culture communication. You know, many Chinese artists are coming out and visit all these countries in Central Asia, all the countries, they just have culture communication or culture exchange. So I think, and then let alone the trade. Trade is actually very important. So in the morning when Mr. Solheim said the Nordic countries only focus on the traditional trade and investment or cooperation and development in a kind of traditional concept or traditional way. What I think is actually that can be inclusive in the Belt and Road initiative. So this initiative mostly is about country, the relation or communication between countries. So I give one good example. Another example is
Can you
recently,
make it short, please?
yeah, the last, what I really want to say is that's on October 27th or November, yeah, just a couple of weeks ago, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and the Afghanistan counterpart had a deal about the pine tree seeds. You know, the pine tree seeds. And so China now import this pine tree seeds from Afghanistan. 45 tons of these seeds have been transported to Shanghai. And Afghanistan every year can collect or harvest like 24,000 tons of these pine tree seeds. So if they sell these seeds to China, they can get cash immediately. So
Yeah, sure.
This is a typical example of Belt and Road Initiative projects or
Yes.
trade.
Thank you.
That's what I like to say. Yeah, thank you very much.
Just for the panelists, if you close your video, nobody will know you are there for some reason. So if you want to be visible, you can start your video. If you don't want to, you don't have to.
Can I comment on what you just said? Two quick comments.
Yeah.
Is that possible? The seeds you're talking about, ma'am, are called pine nuts. And in the UK here, a small package of those costs £4. So you're talking about a lot of money. They're not just pine tree seeds, they're pine nuts for salads and gourmet. So that's an important thing. And then
Sorry for my English.
No, but I'm just
It's
trying to
another
show.
barrier.
I'm just trying to show. I'm
Barrier.
trying to show how important those seeds are. Those are quite expensive in restaurants. Number one, and number two, Sweden has been training Chinese doctors for 50 years, 50 years, because one of my colleagues who's probably on this webinar is not talking, has been involved in that. So China goes back many years training Chinese doctors, and he's too shy to say probably he's on the call, but he's probably listening.
By the way, Afghanistan, we have a real terrible humanitarian crisis. Like most of the population, more than half of the population on the verge of starvation. And they need, the United States and Europe have frozen money, which belongs to the Afghan government, which could be used to import food. But the initiatives taken by Afghanistan's neighbors, China, but also Pakistan, Iran, the Central Asian countries, and Russia, helping a little bit, but that cannot solve the problems. I think I'm part of a campaign to release the funds of Afghanistan, so the Afghan, no matter who's in government, the Afghan government could buy food and medicine for their people, especially now the winter is coming. We have Mr. Godfrey. Godfrey has been raising his hand for a while.
One quick point, and then yes, I just would
very
say,
quickly.
Yes, very quickly. But I think that the former ambassador from China, Gui Kongyu, when we were talking about Swedish infrastructure for trains, we laughed. It's a joke. Compared to China's development of fast trains, Sweden is predicting it needs to 2035 to even come up to a lower level. So the fact that China would even be willing to help build such infrastructure in Sweden is only beneficial for Sweden, because we're way behind on those points. We're not at all up to date. And one of the key engineering companies, which is ultimately Chinese CRTG, are the ones who are building the Tunnelbanan here in Sweden. So China can play a very positive role to bring European and Swedish infrastructure up to par.
Okay, good. Mr. Godfrey, please go ahead.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to everyone, especially the panelists, for the very good insight about the PRI.
Please speak a bit louder.
Yes, sir. Yeah, and thanks a lot all the panelists. My question would be directed to Hussein Askari, or anyone who could answer that, because especially him, I've been following for the last 1 year. Infrastructure is one of the most important factors to facilitate international trade, regional trade. However, looking at the BRI map that I've watched and I've seen even on today's lecture by Hussein, not much part of Africa is covered. Mostly it's Djibouti, Ethiopia, and some parts of Kenya. And in addition to that, Africa has so many countries that are landlocked. So my question is, what are their plans and strategies by the People's Republic of China to extend the BRI to cover these landlocked countries in Africa in order to facilitate national, regional, international trade, which in turn would facilitate sustainable economic development, which would also support the Sustainable Development Goals number 17. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I was muted. No, I explained in my presentation. One second. I mean, of course, I have more material. I have written a whole book on Africa's development in the context of the Belt and Road. But I think the Chinese, they don't want to impose their own plans on other countries and other continents. But they took this idea of connecting all the capitals of the African nations, which will cut, all the landlocked countries will be involved in this. Of course, these are the main lines, but we have now from Kenya to Uganda, we have from Uganda further, and also from the south, from Tanzania, Zambia, into Rwanda, Burundi, and so on and so forth. So all these countries will be connected together. And that's one of the big problems we have. I mean, I had in previous presentations talked about the African Free Trade Agreement, the Comprehensive African Free Trade Agreement, which was signed 2 years ago. That's a fantastic idea. But there's no trade between African countries because you don't have roads, you don't have railways. And for many people to travel from one African country to another, they have to travel to London and back to Africa, or to Frankfurt and back to Africa. There are no direct connections, even for flights, between African countries. But I think China is trying to get as much as possible done in cooperation with countries, because China does not deal with, it's not like a supranational government. It's a sovereign nation, and it deals with sovereign nations. And she wants to keep that principle alive. So it makes a project with Kenya, it makes a project with Uganda, it makes a project with Congo, with Sudan, with Egypt, whatever. But those countries, then they will have to integrate their own infrastructure, and China can help them. But China cannot tell a country, you should build a railway from your country to the next country, because that's another sovereign country. And that's why a lot of the railway projects are inside certain countries, starting from the coastal areas to the population areas, like from the Mombasa to Nairobi, or from Djibouti to Addis Ababa. But then you need to go to the next step, is to connect to the next country. But that depends a lot on the relationship between the African countries rather than on China. And I think China has shown enormous willingness. And I think the landlocked countries in Africa are the most affected by poverty, by lack of power. I mean, they are water rich, but the water is poisonous, for example. And I think this is also a question of that, the question of infrastructure, because people say, well, the Belt and Road is not only infrastructure, it's about healthcare. But I mean, you have to imagine, what was I showing the map? I don't know, I couldn't share the map. I was speaking, I thought you could see the map. But for example, healthcare, I mean, you cannot have healthcare without electricity and clean water and transport. Just forget about it. You cannot produce vaccines if you don't have clean water, energy, transport, and skilled labor, of course. So there's no differentiation. It's all one package. It's infrastructure, roads, railways, water, power, healthcare, education, scientific research, space research. It's all one package. It's not separate. So I think African nations should take the initiative also and promote this. There's a lot of propaganda and fear and threats against African countries not to work with China, but that those nations have to solve that problem themselves.
It seems that might also be an open door for Scanwater to explore the idea of moving into African areas with the EU to clean up the water. I think that would be an interesting initiative. You might want to say something about that, Mr.
Definitely, Stephen. That is a huge opportunity, and of course, the concept that I presented very, very briefly today should definitely be part of that type of development. They don't need to do the same mistakes as we have done in all our water infrastructures achievements so far.
Okay, do you have more questions?
Yes, we have one more hand raised. You will be allowed as a panelist, so people can see you. Yingping.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hello. Thank you, Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. This is Yingqing from Shanghai Institute for International Studies. It's a very excellent speeches, and I would like to send my greetings to Mr. Tillman, our old friend. And I have two questions for, one goes to Mr. Askari, and the other goes to Henry. First one is, what do you think about which specific areas can China and the European countries cooperate in Africa regarding the Belt and Road initiative? I mean, because Africa is how to say, is a very important. It's very important for European, and it is used to be the third market participants for the two sides. So this is my first question. And the second, I would like to ask Mr. Tillman. I was very impressed by your speech about the digital Silk Road. I think it's about 2 years ago in Fudan University. So my question is, because today we are talking about the green Belt and Road, and I think the digital Silk Road is much about the digital, and it's related more about something green. So can you please share with us the recent development of the digital Silk Road? Thank you. Thank you very much. I can't see myself.
Okay, you should start your video, but anyway, thank you for the question.
Yeah, we see you now. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hussein, do you want to go first?
Yes, of course. I mean, the EU and China can share a lot in Africa, because first of all, we have to change the attitude of Europe towards Africa to stop thinking about Africa as a burden, as a problem, where there are civil wars, there are famines, there are epidemics, and lots of immigrants want to come to Europe. That's the image of Africa in Europe. As I showed, President Xi Jinping says that it's the most promising place on earth. You have 1.3 billion people. Most of them are young people below the age of 23. The 1.3 will be 3 billion people by 2050. And it's an ambitious continent. It has enormous resources, but also, most importantly, human resources. Africa is 3 times larger than China. China is very big, but Africa is 3 times larger than China. So China alone cannot solve all the problems in Africa. African nations with China, with Europe, and hopefully the United States can work on a number of, especially the question of the 3 bottlenecks, which I mentioned. The lack of capital. There's a need for a lot of capital to invest in infrastructure because it's expensive It's not money generating. When you build infrastructure, you don't get a lot of money back, but you raise the productivity of the economy to allow agriculture, industry, and other sectors to thrive, and that's what produces so-called money. What is needed is transfer of technology. There's lots of fantastic technological and innovative technologies in Europe, like the kind of Mr. Finsrud has shown today, in the biotech, in the infrastructure, in all kinds of technologies. Europe should share it with Africa. I mentioned the question of nuclear power. Europe should go back and build nuclear power and develop nuclear power and share it with Africa. We need to get the third bottleneck is the lack of skilled labor. Europe should have massive programs for educating young African people on skilled work, not giving them courses in democracy and how to go out and demonstrate against their governments, as we usually see that European and American embassies in Africa, they have courses for people how to do riots and fight against police. What those young people need to learn is how to participate in building their country, in the digital economy, in all kinds of things that their country need, healthcare, agriculture. That's what those young people should be employed in. So I think there are lots of things that Europe and China can do together, but the Europeans have to change their view, their mindset, how they look at Africa. It's a great treasure. It's not a problem.
That's a great segue. Thank you very much for that segue into
Thank you
digital.
very much.
For digital. First of all, thank you for the question. Thank you for remembering. I loved talking about that. That was the theory, but wow, look what's happened since then. So if you remember, we were talking about 70 different tech hubs around the world. Now they just keep exploding in terms of numbers. I just was with the Bangladesh government the last week here in the UK, and their tech hub is now, they're trying to replicate, Bangladesh is trying to replicate Singapore and Indonesia. It's just extraordinary how this is growing so quickly in technology. In the last, I didn't have enough time on the presentation, but just a couple of vignettes for everybody. You heard Mr. Solheim talk about the Chinese ports. Well, 2 of those ports are now 5G AI, no humans. As of September, one of them is 2.5 million TEUs. Can you imagine? And we had someone from Serbia today. We didn't have Hungary on today. 5G AI rail, no humans, all done 5G AI. This is not something that's in the future. It's actually now. So it's so extraordinary how fast this is moving. And I deal with I deal with the financial community, and all the people are up in arms. Why we lost money on this? We lost money on this. But actually, what China is doing is gripping that data. Right. And it's because of the gripping of that data, understanding that we're going to have considerably more uplift on rail services, faster rail services. Belarus was on today. Pakistan's on today. This is all coming very, very quickly. And no matter what, you listen, and some others listen. Very few people listen. But at least Henry Kissinger has said, basically, our threat in the future is the rapid digitalization of China. So at least one person gets it, right? I don't know who else gets it, but I mean, he certainly gets it, but I don't think they have a clue. I mean, I do this every day for a living, and I find very few people understand how fast this is progressing. So thank you for asking the question. I'm sure if you ask this question 2 more years from now, I'd say it's even faster than it is today. But anyway, thanks for dialing in and taking the time to ask. Hussein and Stephen and Jorg, over to you for anything else.
Thank you. Bill is asking, the BRI is a trading initiative, how to integrate the traditions of the East and West and that of Africa. I think the BRI is not simply a trade initiative, it's a development process, which includes, of course, trade. Trade is an important part, but I think China and the West have great traditions in trade, but also many African nations who are traders. East Africa, they had the trade with Asia many centuries ago, long before Vasco da Gama and the Portuguese. So I don't know if someone else wants to answer the question.
Yeah, it's also, as you heard a few minutes ago from our friend, the reporter who was freezing from Stockholm, basically saying it's cold out here. But she's right. It's also, you know, it's education, it's training, it's cultural, it's music. It's all those things. Yes, it's not just everyone gets stuck in this infrastructure and who has what projects done. It's much, much bigger. I just talked about global links, a digit, you know, you're looking about 4 cables or 5 cables around the world to link us all together. That's extraordinary. And once the cable in Peru gets built back into China, it's all wired. And once we get authorization to continue the Arctic Connect cable, it's all wired in less than 10 years. Extraordinary.
I don't see any other hands raised or any questions in the chat. I think that was it. It was a rich discussion. Bill says thank you. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, well, I just want to thank everybody for their input and contributions today. That's made it a very fruitful and positive dialogue and development of knowledge. And I urge only that we will continue this process in the future, maybe more often than it has been. Hopefully we will see, but we will welcome all of the present participants to rejoin us in the future context, and that eventually I think we will, with the optimism that I was trying to communicate through my presentation of Leibniz and the human spirit, that we will overcome this kind of insanity that does not see the benefits of working together. I'm convinced that is the pathway for the human race in the future. So thank you all, and welcome back into the coming period in the coming year.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for letting us present both the project and our company. Thanks.
You're most
Welcome.
welcome.
Bye-bye.